Jimi Hendrix is hailed as one of the greatest rock stars of all time, but many people don't know anything about his roots. Johnny Allen Hendrix, who would later change his name to James Marshall Hendrix and was known in the pop culture world as Jimi Hendrix, was born to a 17-year-old named Lucille on November 27, 1942. Jimi's parents, Lucille and Al, had a stormy relationship in which they conceived two more sons and would later split. Jimi only saw his mom sporadically until her death in 1958. He looked to music as an escape. He was a big fan of the blues, mostly Muddy Waters and B.B. King, and also listened to rockers such as Chuck Berry and Eddie Cochran. He taught himself to play guitar as a teenager and saw Elvis perform when he was young. He was left-handed but learned to play a right-handed Stratocaster upside down. He got his first electric guitar the following year and played with two high school bands, the Rocking Kings and the Tomcats. A year after his mother passed away, he dropped out of high school and worked odd jobs while continuing to follow his musical aspirations. Hendrix enlisted in the Army in 1961 and became a paratrooper. He created a band while he was in the service named the King Casuals and served until 1962 when he was discharged with an injury. After that, he began working as a pickup guitarist under the name Jimi James. He moved to New York City in 1964 and had played behind artists like B.B. King, Little Richard, Ike and Tina Turner, and Wilson Pickett, among others. He then began playing the club circuit after the move with King Curtis, the Isley Brothers, John Paul Hammond, and Curtis Knight. In 1965, he formed his own band called Jimi James and the Blue Flames, which played in Greenwich Village coffee shops around New York City. There he would meet Chas Chandler of the Animals, who took him to London in 1966 and arranged for the creation of the Jimi Hendrix Experience with Englishman Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums. He created his first album, Are You Experienced, in early 1967. He quickly became the rage of London's pop society, but he was not seen in America until June of 1967, when Paul McCartney insisted that he would appear at the Monterey Pop Festival. At this festival, during his performance, he burned his guitar on stage. After his tour, he made Axis, Bold as Love, and Electric Ladyland, both in 1968, which shot him into superstardom. He considered himself a musician more than a star, and shortly after the beginning of his second American tour, he stopped being so extravagant in the way he acted on stage and just simply performed his music. This led to a hostile reception, leaving him to conclude that his best music came out of an informal setting. After this, he began the construction of his own studio called the Electric Lady in New York, where he was always eager to experiment with musical ideas. In the end of 1968, his co-managers began to disagree on the direction that Jimi's music was to take, and he was also pulled in even another direction to have an all-black band due to pressures from black power advocates. In 1969, Hendrix appeared at Woodstock Festival with a large, informal ensemble called the Electric Sky Church. Later that year, he put together an all-black band called the Band of Gypsies, and this debut concert was at New York's Fillmore East on New Year's Eve, and provided the recordings of the group's only album during its existence. Jimi passed away in September of 1970 due to the inhalation of vomit following barbiturate intoxication. Suicide wasn't ruled out, but evidence pointed to an accident. At the time of his death, there was 5 albums that had been released. Since he died, many have tried to impersonate or recreate his music. And in 1990, his ex-girlfriend, Kathy Etchingham, along with Mitch Mitchell and his wife, prodded Scotland Yard to reopen the investigation into his death, and by 1993 they had agreed. In 1994, they announced that they had found no evidence to pursue the investigation any further. Also in 1994, a 24-year-old named James Henrik Daniel Sundquist claimed to be the heir to Jimi's estate due to the fact that he had an affair with Hendrix's mother. After an interview with Jimi's sister, it was concluded that there are many unreleased recordings and that if they were to release 2 discs per year, they could release them for 10 years to come. All this information comes from biography.com and rollingstone.com.